you can learn so much that you can kill a bunch, or you can learn so much that you'll never kill anything. Like I said, people like Mike, I mean, there wasn't too many people back then that killed big deer consistently. And if they did not talk to you. They didn't talk to anybody, not even their own parents. Like, they didn't tell anybody anything. And then there was another guy that was one of my dad's buddies. And my dad liked bow hunting, but this other guy, like, he was one of those guys that had 2 or 3 trophy bucks that he got mounted with his bow before we even knew it was possible to kill a trophy buck with a bow. And he was started doing it more and more consistently as I got to be an early teenager and stuff. And he was one of the guys that, like, my dad was maybe more passionate about hunting than maybe anybody in that club, except for this guy. He's like one of those guys, you know, he's like the Jamie McKay of Selma in 1985. You know what I mean? Like, he'd take off all winter. You know, he would take 3 months vacation and he would live there. Like, he'd go down there and he would hunt every single day, and he'd kill 5 bucks every year. He's the only person I ever knew that bucked out any year, and he did it every single year. And it may not be all monsters, but he would kill 2 that'd go on the wall every single year, and he did it until the club shut down. It got to where when I got to be probably 16, 17, when I started driving myself and going down there, he would take me with him to get deer, which was like, back then, it's like an honor. I mean, you didn't have communication with other people. You didn't know other people that deer hunted, much less could just get on Facebook and be like, hey, how do you kill deer in a swamp? You know what I mean? Like, you can't just learn this kind of stuff. Like, this guy's been killing these deer for 10 years and has never spoke to anybody in the whole club. You know, you don't know where he's hunting. He won't tell anybody. You don't know nothing. Well, it got to where I spent so much time. I didn't watch football. I didn't watch any TV or anything once they started getting TVs or everything else down there. Like, I scouted I was just obsessed with looking for buck sign. I loved it. And he was that way. And we kept ending up on top of each other. And it kind of got to where when he would shoot a deer, he'd come and get me and be like, hey, I've got a big buck down over here. Will you please come help me get it? Because at the time, you know, he was getting a little older and wanted a little bit of help. Didn't trust anybody else to go anywhere near even where he was parked. But he didn't hunt boxes. You know, he didn't hunt ladder stands. Like, he hunted his tree lounge, you know, and he carried it in and out. He didn't want anybody to find it on a tree. So, like, we'd get in his truck and we'd ride over there, and he'd take me up in there, man. He'd be like, now, pay attention. When we go up in here, I'm going to show you something. He's like, you've been hunting over here, you know, because I'd be telling him, I'm like, because he'd ask at first few years, he'd be like, where are you at exactly on the map? And I'd show him. He'd be like, okay, I'm over here. We won't be on top of each other. We'll both go in there. If I'm here signed out, just let me know. You go in there too. I'm like, all right. Well, once he got to trusting me, you know, when it was like, we're just this group we're going to go kill some deer, you know, he started taking me, and he would tell me, he's like, no, we'd have like a transition line, or it'd be like 2, really it was an SMZ on flat land coming, there'd be like a ditch, and there'd be these 2 giant cutovers that might be 200 acres apiece. And they would come together to a pinch point, the narrowest spot in that little SMZ, there may be like an acorn tree. Well, there would be acorn trees down the entire thing. We'd be walking in, he's like, now, where would you hunt right here? And I'd be like, well, I mean, I'd hunt over here. These red oaks are dropping. He's like, well, where's deer feeding around them? You know, and I'd be like, well, I mean, I don't really see nothing, but I mean, you know, they're going to come to acorns. He's like, yeah, they're going to come to acorns, but they ain't coming to these acorns. You know, and we'd walk up in there. And he would do this while we were going to get this deer. And he just loved, like, I don't know if he'd never had a chance to teach anybody, but you know how it is, man. Like, no matter how much you don't want to tell somebody about your spot, it's like aching to get out of you. Like, you like to share. It's just fun. You know, it's part of the old style of hunting, what we used to do. It was awesome to be able to sit around the campfire and tell stories to people you trusted, because you wanted somebody to know, you know.
Absolutely.
And he just never had anybody he could tell. So, like, we'd go up in these places, and he would show me when we would get to that spot. He was like, now, what's the difference here? And it wouldn't be another 100 yards, but it might be the SMZ split, and there may be like another cutover, and then 2 cutovers, and then there would be like this acorn tree with like either deer droppings or dirt, and there would be these trails coming out of those cutovers, and you'd see like a rub that big on a tree. And he's like, that right there is what gets them killed. And I'm like, that little rub? And he said, yep. He said, because this acorn tree, this is where they're feeding. He said, I don't care how big the tree is or where it's at. He said, if there's a tree there that's rubbed, he said, a buck stood there. He said, all he has to be is big enough to shoot. He said, and you know, like I said, without game cameras, that's your state of mind. You don't get to pick what you're hunting. You find the bucks. And at the time, nobody could find 5, much less 2 a year. I mean, you couldn't you couldn't find that many bucks. So like he would sit there. I think he killed that spot I'm talking about. He killed 4 or 5 like hammers right there with a bow. And after seeing that, I started trying to duplicate it. Like he'd show me on the map what it looked like on the aerial map. And then you could start duplicating that on that aerial map. So you could just go check it. And he just told me, he said, don't stop walking until you find where those bucks are traveling. He said, when you find where they're traveling, even if you're on a road or you see sign, start following it until you figure out where he's going and what he's doing. So anytime I just ride roads with a 4-wheeler or whatever, and when I find a rub or a track, I'd stop no matter where it was at. He said, try to get the roads out of your mind. He said, these deer don't know there's roads. They don't know there's boxes and ladders. Unless there's people going to them all the time, they're going, they skirt them and everything else. He said, but when you find where a deer is moving, he's just in the woods. He's out in the middle of nowhere. A road's not a road to a deer. So, you'd be going down the road and find this giant track or like a rub on the side of the road. And it's like, oh man, like this is like main road, or this is where everybody does this or that. And you just get off the road and start walking. And after you got back in there a little ways, it was like rub, or you'd find scrapes or whatever. And I just started setting up on them. You just climb a tree. And if you found a really good spot where it's like just tore up with sign and stuff, like you knew, it's like, man, this is the spot. Well, it might be 1st of January. And most of our deer we killed there was the last week of January. That was like the second the year was going to end, that was when everybody killed their big deer. And you'd sit there for a month and not see anything. And then all of a sudden, after 3 weeks, here he'd come down a trail and I'd kill one. And it got to where I was killing, deer like these in the floor over here, like little 6s and 7s and stuff like that. Like every year I'd kill 2 or 3 of them. And I started getting the hang of what to look for. And I started noticing like the bigger the sign, the bigger the buck. And Mike is his name. He started showing me some of that stuff too. But after probably 4 or 5 years of hunting with him, it got to the point to where I had almost found every spot on the whole club that he hunted, just by looking at the map after learning just those differences. It's just like the terrain coming together and stuff like that. But it was really, I'm glad I got to learn then, because with the tools you're given now, you take what you already learned then, and it's like, we talked about it the other night, when you showed me a map, it's like, this is where the deer are. You know what I mean? Like if I was a deer, this is where I'd be. But it was also really interesting because you didn't know patterns back then either. You didn't know deer patterns or people patterns. Everybody pretty much went to the same trees. So on private land in a hunting club, and you know everybody in there, you already know exactly where they're sitting. And over a period of time, I learned that the deer just went in between everybody. It's like they never did leave. They were just always just going in between everybody and skirting them. So it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, the whole old timer like woodsmanship aspect is like, fascinating, because you're talking about like when you're talking about hunting with Mike, this guy you're talking about who's in his probably mid to late 60s. Was this like in the 90s?
He was younger than that. He was probably at the time he was probably in his mid 40s.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. This was back in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Early to mid 90s.
So, finding somebody like that who's, got that experience before a day and age like we have now with technology, cell cameras, OnX, digital maps, just so many other things that we have that we can kind of almost not necessarily speed up the process, but it's almost like you rely so much on the technology you like lack on the woodsmanship.
Well, a lot of what I've noticed, and I'm only 43, but I grew up in that generation. So like what I'm noticing nowadays that's frustrating to people like me is that a lot of times the kids or even the adults that are new at it get so discouraged because of the failure or just lack of success by what they know to be true. And sometimes what they know to be true is not necessarily true or consistent. So when you're told this is what you do, or you learn this is what you do, and then you go apply that and get 0 back, then you're constantly thinking you're doing something wrong and you don't understand. Where I was taught, this is impossible, but if you find this, you might see one day. And then when you did, it's like, okay, I'll try that again for a year. And it might take you a year to kill 1 deer.
Oh, that's a good point.
And that's why it's like when I was talking to you the other day about putting them cameras up. I'm like, did you put a camera here? You're like, no, we went and checked this spot. I'm like, you can learn so much that you can kill a bunch, or you can learn so much that you'll never kill anything. Like, and it's not just changing strategy; it's learning all the strategies and then applying it to where you're standing. Like if you've got 5 acres, you got to learn how to kill deer on that 5 acres, or you just go hunt somewhere else. And some people don't have that option. So like what we did, we had 6,000 acres, and you learn to kill deer on that 6,000 acres. So like we just did what we had to do based on what we learned ourselves. Because like I said, people like Mike, I mean, there wasn't too many people back then that killed big deer consistently, and if they did, they did not talk to you. They didn't talk to anybody, not even their own parents. Like they didn't tell anybody anything.